Hi, I'm Brad, and this was one of the most painful videos I have ever had to make. So I would argue that I take hardware reviews quite seriously. This one even more so because this is the first device that Meta decided it is not a gaming only console. It is a device that can enhance productivity and basically become a monitor replacement in a collaboration tool. Due to these extremely high claims, including its extremely high price at $1,500 or 1,800 euros, I decided I need to spend at least a month with this thing before I even comment on it, at least in a full official video. I might have commented here and there on Twitter, and I know it made a lot of people upset in some of those tweets, but here I am. So after a month of testing, I was able to come to a reliable conclusion, in my mind. In fact, I might have spoiled it with the title of this video. Before I go on my huge rant spree, let's just do a quick overview of the specifications that are listed for this device. The headset is a high-end standalone. It runs on an XR2 Plus Gen 1 SoC with 12 gigabytes of LPDDR5 RAM. It has a Wi-Fi 6E eventually enabled chip inside for better Wi-Fi. It has a very low battery life of 1 to 2 hours with everything on. That is a term given by Meta, and I can confirm that. It's a mixed reality device. According to Meta, it has color pass-through and can do some things to overlay AR into your virtual world. We'll talk a bit about that later. The device has dual 1800 by 1920 per eye QLED, which is just a fancy version of LCD, high-end LCD, with a mini LED backlight that only runs up to 90 Hertz. One of the huge features of this device is really the whole form factor that was enabled by the pancake optics, and we're going to talk about these optical system quite a bit later on in this video because I'm not going to lie, they are probably the best part of this device. There's also some brand new controllers, and I have a lot to say about these as well. Basically, spoiler alert, they're the first Quest controllers, really any Oculus controllers that I've actually enjoyed using, which says a lot. And finally, this entire OS on here is basically built off the Quest 2 ecosystem. Pretty much entirely, in fact. It's the same Android operating system you get on the Quest 2. It shares all the same titles. You can do a couple more Quest Pro only titles, but they're not going to give you much benefit. It's basically a Quest 2 Pro. So let's hop into the fact that it is touted as a mixed reality device. In fact, Andrew Bosworth was asked on an Instagram AMA, if you don't know who he is, he's the Chief Technical Officer of Facebook Reality Labs, so he's in charge of all of this. He says his favorite feature, and the one he was most excited about, was the mixed reality, color pass-through. Let me just tell you right now, I truly believe this feature with the current hardware and software, it's truly a gimmick right now. I was very excited for the concept of mixed reality before this device came out because people were saying, yeah, it's pretty good. It's you know, it's where it is for a first generation device. However, it's worse than I expected, and I really cannot imagine myself using it for very long at all. In fact, I never used it except maybe the first day, except for just a very small minor task. It's highly speculated that the pass-through quality is so bad because they removed a pretty important component at the very last minute of production, which was an IR projection depth sensor. Now, it was definitely there. Mark Zuckerberg said it would be there earlier in the year, and Meta employees have since confirmed that they did remove it pretty much in the last minute. Interesting enough, there was an iFixit teardown that even showed that the actual slot where it should be, which it would have been right above this middle camera here, it's still there. It's just empty. In fact, even the ribbon cable that was supposed to plug directly into that depth sensor is also still there. I don't expect people being able to mod a new depth sensor inside it and get it working, but the ribbon cable is there. It was basically a very similar concept to what you see in iPhones, higher-end iPhones these days, where you have a bunch of IR being spread out with a sort of LiDAR sensor that can be able to kind of see the depth of different things and objects pretty much automatically if the software is there. But this just doesn't have that, so it cannot do cool room mapping suggestions or automatic plane detection at the current moment. It was also supposed to improve hand tracking even further, but the hand tracking is improved in this device, and we'll talk about that later. Basically, the way that this color pass-through works is it's very similar to the Quest 2. So the Quest 2 uses black and white cameras to basically see your environment, and then they use some heavy software algorithms to kind of improve the depth correction and make it look more natural to your eyes, because the cameras are not in the same place as your actual real life eyes. These two are the big black and white cameras. They're about 1024 by 1024 each. And then there's a 16 megapixel camera up here. So these two basically do all the same stuff as the Quest 2 at a higher resolution, and then does all the depth correction. And then finally, they overlay this single 16 megapixel color camera to create color pass-through. And it just looks terrible. Like, honestly, the method is very strange. I don't think it works well. There's a lot of weird banding around your fingers, and things are up close to you because the colors just don't match. It just looks awful. It basically looks like a degenerated VHS tape, if you were old enough to remember what those were like. It just, it's so bad, and I cannot imagine myself wanting to use this for only AR. I don't even think companies will want to use this thing for AR in its current state. I know there's like the examples where BMW are actually creating and developing cars and CAD models inside VR, which this does have an app called Gravity Sketch that is fantastic, and it's probably the best software use case that I've seen for it so far, because you can at least compare models to the size of real life things in your environment. But just the resolution of the mixed reality pass-through is just so low. I think that car companies like BMW or Mercedes will want to opt to something that is actually definitely focused on giving a high-end experience at a higher end price. When you're talking about these huge corporate companies, money is not an issue for these certain features. That's where things like Vario actually exist in a much more meaningful way. I really do not think that Meta will ever do this single color camera overlay thing. If they ever do the overlay thing, I think they will be doing 2 color cameras to make it at least a little bit better, higher resolution. In fact, the Stinson, which is the Quest 3 CAD models that were leaked to me, suggested, yeah, that they're already doing that. Ironically, the Stinson still has a depth sensor inside that unit. We'll see if it makes it to the final version, but it seems like even the Quest 3 will have a somewhat better mixed reality hardware than the Quest Pro, which is kind of weird. The entire color pass-through overlaying also takes about 35% of overall processing just to do that overlay color feed. And the thing will get super hot. Like, the hottest this thing ever gets is if you use this thing with AR mode for maybe 10 minutes or more. You feel it. It's like the sun is burning your face in some instances. And due to the fact that it takes so much processing, you start opening up a game, a mixed reality title, and then it's overlaying virtual stuff in your environment, which you do have to mark out walls, you have to mark out furniture, you have to mark out everything. It's not automatic. And then you add the fact that maybe you want to record that MR footage. You are going to have the most stuttery footage ever. It's like going to be bad for the most part. If you want to have any motion smoothing or any of these cool color effects that make showing off mixed reality better. There's so many use cases where I try to record mixed reality just directly, maybe with like a virtual desktop in my space or something, and just look bad, like terrible, because this chip inside here cannot handle what they're trying to do at the current moment. I also think the idea of mixed reality games are also kind of confusing right now. I've seen some mixed reality games that rely on an entire room. You map out walls and things work and things pop out. The portals are opened. That works fine. They're very simple. But I'm also starting to see games that are pretty much designed with the idea of building scale, where the idea is you would have multiple people sharing the same environment. This might be useful for arcades or location-based experiences, but the idea of the fact that you're going to expect people to map out their entire house, run around with multiple people all doing the same thing, seems even more of a challenge from like a developer's perspective than VR games, which already have a ton of problems for people who don't even have the space to do walking around or room scale VR. So I'm not convinced right now that mixed reality gaming is going to be a huge thing with this device. I think there'll be a lot of interesting experiments done with it. We're already seeing a lot of cool stuff, like being able to place VR chat avatars in your real life room with some obviously third-party software related on a PC. But those things are pretty neat, but again, they're just not something that I think developers will be able to quickly catch on and make something that is truly genre defining. Now, if this thing worked outside and you could walk around reliably, maybe maybe you could do something like a Pokemon Go. That's probably my favorite idea of like a sample game that could work with this kind of system. But Meta does not want you taking this thing outside, like at all. They say that the actual cameras and the lenses on the cameras will burn out from the sunlight, the brightness levels of the displays, even though the fact you can block it out somewhat, it's just not an outdoor device. Especially the fact that when you are using AR, because the fact this thing is heating up so much, and if you're outside during the summer while these chips are already overheating quite a bit, I can imagine it will degrade quality of your experience an intense amount. It just makes you laugh because this is the best that a $1,500 mixed reality device can do from the largest company that is spending the most money on VR right now. And it just, we're supposed to believe that a AR glasses is going to come within the next 10 years that will basically do all that stuff that I'm explaining. It's not going to happen. I do think camera pass-through is going to improve because the one good thing about camera-enabled AR compared to the optical AR is it relies on the phone industry. Every phone comes out every couple of years. There's a ton of high resolutions. Cameras are getting better. They're getting optical stabilization. They're getting faster, higher refresh rate, global shutters. All of those things can translate to becoming a camera on this device or future iterations of this device. So I do think mixed reality is not really a forever gimmick. I just think right now it's a gimmick in this headset. So that's already a pretty long rant on how one of the selling features of this thing is just terrible and should not be a reason you buy this thing. Let's go into another reason why you also should not buy this thing. In fact, it's pretty much what the title of this video was all about. This device is heavily marketed as a business and productivity device. They don't really say enterprise because there's actually no really business enterprise software right now where businesses can actually create a business account, not tied to any other things. But the idea is to be able to replace your monitor is kind of the best example they would give, the most simplest example in a way. And I will say I force myself every day for a month to use this thing for 2 hours. It's pretty much full battery life as a monitor replacement. I hated that month. I never had so many headaches, so much eye strain, and so much just terribleness over that month. Now, before you say anything, there are a few different software titles that you can actually use it as a monitor replacement. The big three are, well, let's start with the one that actually Meta developed for the Quest Pro, the only first-party app that Meta developed for the Quest Pro, and that is Horizon Workrooms. I do think Horizon Workrooms has a very nice baseline of features. It allows you to mark out part of your desk so you can see your keyboard, mouse, and other things. And it does a lot of other neat stuff in case you want to do some virtual collaboration. But for using it as a personal device, I don't really think it's the best application, especially on Windows, because you can only have one monitor and it auto defaults to 1920 by 1080p. In fact, all of these kind of software titles do auto default to 1080p, and if you try to kind of bump that up, you're going to have a lot of problems with a lot of these softwares. In fact, I don't even think you will want to bump up the resolution further, because if you bump up the resolution, text is going to get smaller, and it's going to give you even more eye strain than before. Workroom also has what I would say some pretty ugly environments. Again, the idea is they have environments you place in a VR setting. You can be on a beach, you can be on a forest or whatever, except those environments are pretty ugly and uninspiring to me. Immerse is another application that basically does or tries to do a lot of the same things. I will say their environments are way more beautiful than Horizon Workrooms. And I would say Immerse is sort of like the do what you want, try to figure out everything. They give you a ton of different settings so you can actually support stuff like ultra-wide monitors and all these other different features. But it's not as refined, obviously, as Horizon Workrooms. And then finally, there's Virtual Desktop, which I tend to use more often for what I was doing. It's got a really good text render compared to these other applications. For me, what I've noticed, I still default to 1080p, which sucks because, again, my main monitor that I use daily for work and everything is a super ultra wide monitor at 1440p, and it doesn't look good in a lot of these apps, including Virtual Desktop right now. The best it looked was in Immerse, but even then, it wasn't acceptable for me to want to replace my ultra-wide monitor and use this entirely. It felt like a downgrade. But the main reason I use virtual desktop, even though it defaulted to 1080p, is because just to be able to switch and toggle between VR, Steam VR, and non-VR was just something I like about it. That's really the kind of one main features of virtual desktop, and it still works, well, great now. We'll talk about why it did not work great for that entire first month, because there were some issues there. So Meta is doing a couple interesting tricks, really the first time in a consumer device, to edge out more FOV. They are counter-rotating the displays so that they're kind of giving a little bit more diagonals to the horizontal field of view, but it also kind of comes at the cost that the pixels are also rotated in a way that the renderers, for the most part, do not seem to be able to anti-alias for right now in most situations, at least on standalone. And even though they increase the pixels per inch because you can have smaller displays when you are using pancake lenses, it's still the same resolution as Quest 2. And you do see sort of the pixel gaps between all the lenses, but they're even more dramatically different than what I'm used to because they're slightly rotated. And when you have text on a screen, they all feel like little fleas kind of walking around, especially on like borders and edges and things. It looks really bad most of the time. And the only way to sort of solve this would be increasing text scaling on your PC, which is also annoying and not something you want to do, because once you start increasing the text scaling to make it bigger and make it bolder, look better for your eyes because of the weird aliasing, then yeah, you're kind of getting past the point where it's not even a 1080p monitor. It's something less at that point. So yeah, text just feels painful for me, especially black on white backgrounds. It looks a bit better with white or more contrasting backgrounds with white on darker text, but it still is just not ideal. Again, I've gotten so much eye strain just from trying to do everything related to text in this headset, and I was just happy when the month was over and I don't have to use this thing as a monitor replacement when I'm forced to. Technically, the overall pixels per degree of this device is around 22. The industry kind of says that 60 is what we call human eye resolution, or like really the highest that the human eye can see overall a broad spectrum of your FOV. And this is at 22. Now, the industry does also say, when I talk to people that work in displays and optics, 30 is kind of the baseline starting point when you can actually say most people are able to see with good eyes around there. Not everyone's gonna be able to see 60, but 30 to 40, that is the target you want to hit when you start doing these things like text. And I do truly believe that. Again, this is 22 pixels per degree. Text looks awful. I don't want to use it for text. So once this thing gets a higher resolution, smaller gaps and all these other tricks, I do imagine I will be able to use it as a monitor replacement someday, just not with this first gen device. The biggest use case that some people have come up to me for it as a monitor replacement is bringing it on travel with a laptop. And if you are doing that, if you want to do that, then you will want to use a MacBook. Ironically, the MacBook version of the Streamer for Workrooms, for example, which allows multiple digital desktops. You can have 3 desktops in Workrooms on Mac right now. Not on Windows currently. They say they'll add it, but they haven't really said when. And it's really frustrating because I also noticed the Mac text rendering also seems better than on Windows. So this whole point is a standalone device. It's $1,500, but you're connecting it to a PC anyway for productivity. I just don't really see the value proposition there. Now, I know there's probably some people that say there's going to be more use cases than just using it as a monitor replacement for a PC, but right now there really isn't. Like, there's just so little use cases, and I can't even imagine this device being able to replace something like a Vario XR3 for most companies. It all comes down to the fact that this does not feel like a device that is marketed the way it should be. And let's say that it is. Let's say that you could use this as a monitor replacement. Maybe you just don't have good eyes. Maybe my eyes are better than yours or something, and you think it's fine. Well, another issue I have with this thing, don't worry, we will get to some good stuff about this thing. I got to get all the stuff, the marketing garbage out of the way, and comfort is a real problem for me with this headset. And a lot of other people, actually. I know Mike VR Oasis had a lot of the same issues I had, but even just going on internet, even on Etsy to see sort of modifications for this thing just to make it usable is pretty ridiculous. It actually sounds to me that this thing has opted for a form over function sort of head strap design. Even Carmack himself kind of did say that one reason they wanted to opt for this kind of design and pancake lenses is not even really all the huge benefits of clarity, but they wanted to release a fashionable device. Okay. And I kind of get where they're coming from. They're trying to sell 1,500 devices. They're trying to sell it to companies. They want boomers in business suits to be able to put this on and wear it as a monitor replacement. It's got to look presentable. It's got to look like something that is sleek and from the future and not like a giant brick on the face. I get all that. And maybe the top straps, which are usually like Velcro ropes, they thought does not look good. But I'm going to tell you right now, I am a huge believer on the top strap. This thing is 722 grams or 1.6 pounds if you are American. Florida man here. When I plug this thing in, run my first time setup, it opens a fit guide application. Basically, it wants you to make sure that you are wearing it the way that Meta intends you to wear it. And whenever I follow that fit guide application, I have the worst pain than just doing it all my way, my own way. And pretty much if I do wear it for the recommended 20 minutes, I will get a headache from discomfort within that 20 minutes. It's that painful for me. All the pressure is on your forehead, and there's not many different ways to adjust the headset to where, compared to the Index, for example, where you just have multiple different straps. You can kind of have it lower on your face, higher on your face. You can have the same thing for the back of your head. The top strap enables that, and it's great. This thing is basically shifting all kind of different places on only your forehead, and it's painful. I know I'm a bit of a valve shill, and I'm going to continue that valve shilling right here, but one of the things that a valve engineer said to press during the Index launch was they don't design their headsets to be used for 30 minutes like a lot of their competitors they thought do. They want to use it for multiple hours. And this headset, not only just the battery life, but just the comfort factor really does feel like it was not stress tested for many different head shapes over 30 minutes. It really does feel like that. One of the most uncomfortable headsets I've ever had. And I feel like every time Meta releases a new headset since the Ref CV1, which is a genuinely comfortable headset, it almost feels like they've just been having a downward slope in comfort. Like they just don't care. They want to make something that looks pretty at the cost of whatever else. And it's really unfortunate. What's even more unfortunate, at least with the Quest 2, you're able to buy third-party straps and pretty much take the entire thing off. But this is unibody. You can barely do anything. One of the few things you can do is you can actually take off both of these pads here, and they have like these little snap-on things, and I've started to see some third-party mods on Etsy to take advantage of it to add a top strap. But yeah, it's just wild to me that it just is this wildly uncomfortable for me. In fact, this is the one reason I returned this device originally at the end of my month. But why do I have a new one? Well, we'll talk about that later. There is some really good decisions though for comfort, thankfully. Thankfully, the biggest one that is most notable for me is this little dial right here. This is a eye relief adjustment. So you can actually move this forehead pad up in front and back, which basically does the same thing as the Index, which allows you to get the lens either closer or farther from your face. My wife likes this feature because she wears glasses. I like this feature because I don't wear glasses and I can get the lenses as close to my face to get that maximum FOV, which is pretty much what they advertise, 106 degrees horizontal and 96 vertical. I will say though, with the lenses being so clear, that FOV feels much larger than it actually is to me. It's kind of a weird brain thing, but due to the fact that so many lenses, even on the Index, which is mostly a clear image all the way through, but a lot of other lens systems that have smaller FOVs even feel even more smaller than that because you just see the clarity degenerate over time, especially on a lot of these Fresnel lenses. This is actually one way that Meta advertises that this thing has a large range of IPDs because of how clear the lenses are. They say that people from 55 to 75 IPD can wear this thing, even though the mechanical adjustment itself is 59 through 70. So, yeah, again, these lenses are literally the best part of this headset, and it allows more people to actually get usage out of different, well, at least IPD adjustments situations. The counter rotation I mentioned earlier, even though it added the aliasing effects of the pixels, it doesn't only just give you more FOV, but it also allows better nose gap space naturally. Because when you have two displays and you kind of do this, right over your nose, perfect. So just another little benefit from doing it, and I think more companies will follow suit with this, honestly. Now I want to show you my favorite top strap mod. Because of the idea of meta executives forcing so much time into making sure their HMD is so fashionable that the general mass market cares so much about, I imagine they actually see cringe and pain from things that are happening on VR chat and other platforms that they just don't understand. It looks very niche and weird and creepy. Well, this is my favorite head strap mod to make the thing pretty much similar to that. This is the Quest Pro Cat Ears mod. It uses the actual built-in side light blockers, and you just magnetically attach it to this 3D printed mount here. Very simple. This the stiff mount actually does alleviate some pressure from my forehead because I can actually lay it against the top of my head, and it just looks adorable, hilariously adorable. I think it's just a hilarious little thing that I don't think was originally planned to be a sort of a comfort improvement from the person who made it, but I just wanted to show it off here because, yeah, Meta spent so much time worrying about making this thing look normal. I'm fixing that now. Now, speaking of these light blockers real quick, these are the ones that come in the box. They don't really, I have to say that for productivity, if you are going to use this for productivity somehow, the whole open design does look good for that. But for gaming, no, I really do think you want to block out for multiple reasons. One reason is users who are trying to play VR games, especially with joystick locomotion, and they have the entire thing open, is because you see your real life environment and the fact that you're just standing there in place and the rest of your view sees you moving, your brain is actually having more of a mismatch of the illusion that you're moving than any headset before. So you really do want to be able to block off that environment for VR games. And these don't really do that, honestly. They're very simple. Even the one that Meta sells for $50 doesn't even do that well, from what I've heard. There's actually one 3D print you can get if you have a TPU filament that works way better. They just kind of snap into the lenses and they do actually block out the entire environment better than these or the one Meta sells. I think you can buy them on Etsy for like $10 or something. But yeah, get those if you want to use this for gaming. So yeah, conclusion on comfort for me, even with the side top strap, this is not the only one I have. It's currently just not very comfortable. I cannot get anywhere near the amount of time out of this thing in long time gaming than I can with my Index, which makes sense anyway because the battery is going to drain before I want to get out of VR chat anyway. So it's just one of those things. All right, let's start talking about some good stuff. I know it was like a lot of downer thing in the beginning here, but let's talk about where I think this device ironically shines, and it's painfully hilarious to me. Let's talk about VR gaming. Yeah. So again, Meta says over and over that this device was not designed for gamers in mind. I don't think that's true, honestly. In fact, I feel like a lot of the R&D that was put into the displays and optics in this device were almost definitely focused on a gaming first idea. I think what happened internally, and I was talking to my friend Carl Gutag, who is way smarter than me, and he also agreed. It seemed like there was a lot of R&D and a lot of hope to get these things produced at a mass volumes, these displays and optics, which would be great for VR gaming. But then probably the big wigs of the company went in here and said, wait a minute, we can't just market an expensive device for gaming when we sell a Quest 2. We have to kind of tack on all this other stuff, all this business, productivity, monitor replacement stuff, even if it's not reliable. And yeah, I really do think that a lot of the R&D for the visuals were put with gaming in mind. Even though the displays don't reach 120 hertz like the Index or 144 hertz in some cases, it reaches 90 hertz, and even at 90 hertz, I will say it looks great, like fantastic. One of the best LCDs out there. The device uses two QLED displays with local dimming, which are basically a very high-end LCD. They're not OLED. They're just a type of LCD with a bunch of tricks and special backlights and a quantum dot layer to improve color quality. But these visuals are not good for IT cases, but gaming just looks really good. Especially the one thing I would say is the colors. The colors I think are the one thing I missed. I returned this device and I didn't have it for about 2 weeks. And I went back to my Index. I even bought a Reverb G2, and those headsets were noticeably way more discolored than I remembered after using this thing. This thing does also have local dimming, which means you can actually turn off the pixels or the backlight behind the pixels in certain zones to make things look more black. I'm not really impressed with just local dimming in VR right now, because local dimming zones are larger than the actual pixels are. So when you have certain scenarios, you're going to have what's called huge blooming, to the point where it looks like maybe a little tiny speck of white star in the sky, but it'll have a huge white halo around it because, again, the array of LEDs are going to be much larger than the actual pixels themselves. And I'm also just going to admit right here, I was using this entirely as a PCVR device. The whole concept to me of buying this as a standalone gaming device seems like a huge waste of potential. The chip inside here, I said many times, is an XR2 Plus Gen 1. Pretty much exactly the same as the XR2 and Quest 2. The only thing they did differently is they cut off the RAM from the actual package of the SoC and separated it so they can cool both the RAM and the SoC better to get better performance. But all the cores, all the DSPs, everything inside of there, the GPU, it's all still the same. And that's notable to me. I think it's almost a waste to use this thing for standalone gaming. I think if you're spending $1,500 on a headset, you probably are the type of person who is going to have a high-end PC. And that is important when we talk about aliasing, as I was saying earlier. Using this thing with gaming, and if you want to use it with Wi-Fi or wired link, definitely bump up as much as you can all those super sampling, because before those frames reach your device, you're going to have zero aliasing anymore. And everything's going to look amazingly crisp, amazingly pure. And with the colors I was talking about earlier, I have never felt more presence in the HMD for pretty much a while than I did with this one. So that says a huge testament at how this could be a really good gaming VR headset, at least the optics and the panels. It makes me realize that, wait a minute, that leaked CAD is also going to have very similar optics and panels in the Quest 3. But I imagine they will not have QLED quantum dot layer. They probably will not have a local dimming backplane, but still, I think the optics especially will give a lot of presence for a gaming situation. The one unfortunate thing about using this as a PC VR headset is even using it with wired link. And by the way, this USB-C port, I talked to someone who had it break, basically. And I was kind of worried about that myself, because when I plug the thing in, it feels very weak inside that USB-C port a little bit. And I think plugging it in multiple times over time, if you want to use it wired or wireless in different ways, you gotta be careful with that USB-C port. But even using wired, the battery life in this thing is going to drain and end before your VR session. If you spend at least as many times hours in VR chat as I do, it's impossible to get this thing for a full playthrough for me. It's like it's using USB-C. It doesn't have a display port out, so you're going to have some compression. Mostly color banding, I think, is the worst kind of compression when you get to this point. You can have still really good experiences in wired, but it's still just not going to be as good as a display port out. And it really is just unfortunate that we can't have a direct power line to be able to wear this thing continuously, because they're so focused on this thing being a standalone device. I also said earlier that I had a very bad time the entire first month of this device with wireless or trying to use virtual desktop. When this thing launched, the Wi-Fi drivers for it were god-awful. They had an issue with what's called DFS channel selection, and it was basically unplayable. I literally could not at all use this thing with wireless virtual desktop with two different high-end routers I had set up in my house. I pretty much complained about it hard on Twitter, and luckily in V47, it wasn't in the patch notes, but with data mines and my experiences ever since V47, I can confirm they did fix a lot of those Wi-Fi issues in this device. Again, it does not add Wi-Fi 6E support yet, that's next year, and I imagine the Wi-Fi quality will improve further. In fact, one of my routers is a Wi-Fi 6E router that's directly plugged into my PC. So I'm very hopeful that'll even improve the wireless quality, at least somewhat. It's, again, just shocking to me that a device like this can release with such shoddy Wi-Fi drivers. I mean, Wi-Fi is like the staple of a wireless headset. And it probably also, it made my actual virtual desktop, or not even virtual desktop, a Horizon Workrooms experience a bit shaky too, because my mouse would stutter from loss of connection or latency lags and stuff during that first month. So it's just ridiculous. Virtual Desktop, I should also admit that they released a recent beta update for testing, and again, PCVR gaming wirelessly with Virtual Desktop just improved even more further with that beta update from what I've seen so far. In fact, it even allowed me to test out something that I had a feeling would start becoming more viable with these kind of headsets, at least with the optics and panels, and that is playing flat games in VR. When SteamVR came out in 2016, they did have a basic Unity program where if you launched a flat game in VR, it would put you in a giant theater, and the idea was you'd be able to play with keyboard, mouse, controller. It was never really viable. Not only was the application, for example, terrible, but really just the bulkiness of headsets and just the resolution and the quality was just not worth it to play flat games in VR over a regular monitor. And I will say with this device, this is probably the first device I'll be able to legitimately say I would definitely play flat games more often in this more than my actual monitor. The one reason I would say that is because due to the fact if you close off your outside light, applications should have more control over the colors that you're going to see. And of course, this thing only has 90 hertz, but if that was able to be bumped up, you can also just have smoother experience. It looks great. You have dynamic lighting and virtual environments. It makes sense why Valve has focused so much on a new SteamVR theater mode for what is likely to be their next headset. I think Valve realizes they have a huge library of flat games that can take advantage of and use that as a selling feature for headsets that are getting more comfortable, not this thing, but way more visually appealing. One final thing to kind of head off the gaming section of this video is let's talk about audio a little bit. So this thing has very large speakers on it, way larger and way more impactful, I would say, than the Quest 2 speakers, and they are noticeably better. However, I don't think I like them still. I mean, they are better, like, again, way better, but I think the over-ear headphones of the Index has really ruined my perception of what things sound like in VR or how things can be really good. This has some strange mids, I feel like, for audio, and it just, I don't know, it just feels washed out, slightly washed out, and I can't direct the audio to my ears. It just kind of goes everywhere. It spreads out everywhere in a somewhat unnatural way. And you'll notice because of the actual strap of the headset here, that is what tightens, it's blocking most of these speakers. And I would imagine that that's one reason why the quality just doesn't sound good. I again believe that this was a form factor decision why they chose these kind of speakers rather than just investing some high-end over-ear speakers, because it just wouldn't look as good. But I really do think the Valve Index still wins in terms of audio quality, at least, you know, playback. Let's talk about recording audio quality. So this thing does have 3 microphones on the bottom. And a lot of people, including Upload VR, has admitted that the location of these 3 microphones, which is one more microphone on the Quest 2, is not good placement. It's almost like the HTC Vive. If you had the HTC Vive, you will know that thing popped like crazy because it was right under your nose, and it would just hear pop, 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 pop sounds all the time. And this actually suffers from the same problem. It has way more pops than even the Quest 2. So even though the actual audio quality when it's not popping is better than Quest 2, this thing will pop all the time. And it's so embarrassing to go into like a public world in VR chat and, and people ask, why is your mic popping, bro? And you say, it's because I spent $1,500 on this device. It's just, again, one of those things that drives me nuts. All right, let's stop talking about the HMD at this point. I think we're pretty much done, covered. There's one more feature we'll get back to later, but I want to talk about input a little bit. Let's start with hand tracking. Hand tracking is definitely improved on this thing over the Quest 2. I never really liked using hand tracking on Quest 2. Even when it got better, it just felt bad and jittery and just felt like I had Parkinson's disease or something. The hand tracking, due to the fact they raise the resolution of the cameras that actually track your hands, are noticeably better. In fact, when I was not doing games and maybe I was just like laying around browsing menus and stuff or media viewing, I was wanting to use my hands entirely during those times. I didn't want to use controllers except for gaming. I think that's a pretty noticeable milestone, but it's not perfect yet. There's still a lot more that can be done. The biggest downside to the new hand tracking is actually due to the fact that the cameras are different than the Quest 2, there's actually a dead zone. That you might notice that it's kind of similar to the Windows Mixed Reality where they have two cameras pointing forward and then one camera on each side pointing to the sides. There is a dead zone right between these two cameras that are noticeably kind of apparent when you're doing stuff like the VR chat standalone mode, which added a sort of great benchmark for using hand tracking in VR. Basically, you can use hand gestures, hand tracking, everything to navigate with artificial joystick locomotion and do a lot of other cool stuff. And when you move your hands kind of back and forth, because it kind of requires exaggerated movements of your hands to act as two different joysticks, you'll notice you'll kind of continually spin because there's these split seconds, like probably like one whole second, where when your hand is passing from one camera to the next, it will just lose tracking. Now, that is an extreme example and like probably the highest performance benchmark, but there will be times where if you put your hands in certain places naturally, you're just gonna hit that dead zone. I think this is why Meta announced the hand tracking 2.1 that is supposed to be coming pretty soon. And the main point of it was they are applying deep learning to better understand hand poses when the device's cameras can't see the full hand, or when the hand is moving quickly. Yeah, that sounds like they're developing 2.1 purely because they realize there's a bit of a dead zone here, and when they can't see the full hand, they're just going to have to use machine learning or deep learning to brute force the idea where it might be. So I'm very curious if that'll fix the problems whenever that comes out, but that dead zone is apparent, but yeah, it's hard to judge it. The hand tracking is pretty good. But let's talk about these things. So these controllers, the Touch Pro controllers, they are marvelous. They honestly are. They're probably my favorite part of the entire kit. So let me go on record by saying that I've never really liked any Oculus controller before these. I know that might be heresy for some people, but truly, the Touch CV1, the Quest 1 controller, the Quest 2 controller, all of them I hated in different reasons, different ways. This is the first controller from Meta or Oculus, whatever you want to call them, where I am genuinely impressed and put it on the same level for me as the Knuckles controllers. Now, obviously, a lot of it comes from the actual tracking quality of these things. I never imagined that even now, we would have something as really futuristic as this, being able to place things around your head without any tracking base stations or anything. It's magical for what I use it for. I do not play Beat Saber on Expert Plus or anything, so I'm sorry if I can't give you the sort of tracking quality at that level, but for social experiences where I want to do stuff like jumping jacks with friends or do experience dancing and everything, this is great. This is truly what Quest needed for a long time, or really just Oculus has needed. Now, there's some things I definitely miss from the Index, and again, these are all different personal quality things. People have very different opinions on these, but I do hate holding controllers in the hand. I genuinely do. I love the idea of having a strap that just holds it in place so I can just do more natural throwing things, and this doesn't have it. I tried some third-party attachments that are supposed to add that to them, but they are not good because they don't have a ring to sort of hold on to like the Quest 2 controllers do. So for now, I have to hold on to them constantly, maybe with a wrist strap hanging off and I can let go like that way, but that's still not really for what I want to do. And I do value Valve Index hand tracking. I know it's like one of those weird features that's supported very little, but again, I spend a lot of time in VR chat where social, having hand gestures and all these things just feels nice to have. I think social VR is actually genuinely one of the best use cases for VR right now in sort of this gaming drought, I would call it. I know that might upset some people. So what about other things about this device? Well, it's got, nice joysticks. It feels very heavy and nice and high quality. It also has 3 different haptic motors, which there's not many apps that actually take advantage of it because you actually have a motor here on the top for the trigger if developers want to support it. You have one here on the thumb rest, and you have a VCM, which is basically an Omega haptic sensor in the handle. I was playing Half-Life Alyx, and it was actually hilarious because there was a part in the game where my hands were vibrating so intensely because I had a superpower, basically. And it was like Hitachi wand levels of quality of heavy level vibration. It was also due to the fact that the design, the form factor of these controllers are really so small and thin. I accidentally did something that made me realize something about Half-Life Alyx, where if you actually like point and touch your other hand in Half-Life Alyx, it does give you a haptic feedback by touching your other hand, which is something I've never noticed with any other controller before, due to the different shapes and sizes and everything. And that's incredible because I have like 1,000+ hours in Half-Life Alyx, mostly from play testing and developing workshop maps for that game. So I do hope that there's some way that developers will be able to take advantage of these haptic features, even on PC especially, because that's what I'll be using it for. But before I was planning to rebuy this headset, I was originally going to basically not keep the HMD and buy these controllers for whenever I use Quest 2. They just feel that good to me. They're not perfect, obviously. They don't work in low light scenarios, unless you have you buy one of those IR spreaders that are high power IR spreaders so it can actually see the different points in the wall. Makes me wonder if that's one reason they also had a depth projector that gave off IR as well from the headset, just so these things can work better in low light situations, because both the headset and controllers just don't have IR anymore. But truly magical. I love them. Just my favorite part of the whole kit. I think the most they feel like the most R&D were put into these controllers more than the HMD in some ways. They just feel Omega fine-tuned. One final little trick is I remember when I was talking to some of my sources during the whole leaks of the Quest Pro, they told me that at one point, this part here, which is now basically just a button or a thumb press, it was actually a full-on actual touchpad where you can actually move your thumb and it will track your thumb like a normal touchpad on a laptop or even the Valve Index controllers. Well, it sounds like, and actually to be confirmed basically, the hardware for that functionality still exists in consumer mass production units. It's just totally de-scoped and not used and added in software for any developer or anyone to actually do, which is a bit of a shame because I really would like to use both of these as thumb pads to do sort of a keyboard pressing movement similar to the Steam VR old keyboard had, or I guess the old big picture mode had, because I thought that was still the best way to type on a virtual keyboard compared to just pointers. Now let's talk about the final main feature, the one I left for last because it's one of the weird features in my opinion, because it works sometimes and it doesn't work other times for my face and eyes. Did you guess what it is? Yes, face and eye tracking. It actually has some of the most cameras I've ever seen to do face and eye tracking. Now I'm not new to face and eye tracking. I bought a Vive Pro Eye with the face tracker, so the whole newness of face and eye tracking wasn't exactly mind-blowing for me, but it was nice to see it all in like a very small package. There's 2 cameras on the bottom for your lower face. There's one camera pointed directly at your forehead so it can track eyebrows, and of course the one camera inside each lens to do your eyes, which includes eyelid closing detection. One thing that disappointed me right off the bat with the face and eye tracking, and this might sound, I don't know what you'll think of me, but the one thing I really liked about the HTC Vive's face tracker is it was able to track all different types of tongue movements. Like you can bend your tongue, you can curl your tongue, you can stick it out, blah 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 blah. It was probably the best like way to show off face and eye tracking more than any of the other gestures, honestly. It was just so hilarious, so great, and it's just kind of fun to stick your tongue out at people. Like that's just something you want to do. It's like when the Valve Index allowed people to give the middle finger to people. That was the best way to show that controller off as well. And this just does not have any hardware or software support to track tongue, which is a huge shame in my opinion. Now, this does actually work with PC VR. You can get it working in VR chat, which is great. There's a lot of people from VR, like basically ALXR and VRC face tracking that got this all working super fast and pretty well. There's still some kinks I would like to be worked out, but for the most part, amazing work that the PC VR community has already done to make this thing work for VR chat, for example. However, I noticed that for me, it does not understand my eyes very well, whether it's in standalone or being tracked for basically PC VR, taking all those values and putting it on my PC. It always thinks my eyes are kind of squinting than they actually are. I tried doing different ways of recalibrating with making some of my eyes squinted more and seeing if that works, but for some reason it looks at me and just says, Brad, you are squinting all the time. Your right eye especially, that thing is just closing. It just doesn't look good. It needs some machine learning or something there, because for my eyes it just constantly wants to close them. I don't have that many issues with the mouth or really even the eyebrows. Those work exactly as intended. It's really just the eyes that just give me the sleepy eye syndrome for any of my avatars. And again, I had to just throw out the opinion that the avatars that Meta provide with face and eye tracking, they're just so boring. Like, I get it. They're trying to make a mass market appeal. They want to make everyone into an Animoji. But I really just think it's so boring and uninteresting. Like, I look at myself, I look at my Animoji form with that. I just don't like it. I love being able to be whatever I want. These silly creatures with face and eye tracking especially looks even better. So, I don't know. It just seems like a very niche feature right now for especially the standalone focus that they want people to use it for. Despite the actual eyelid issue, the actual eye tracking, being able to track your gaze and everything, it works great. It's fantastic. It's just high quality. So I know some titles add eye tracking, and while the eye tracking quality doesn't give insane amounts of performance, it definitely does help. The biggest one to talk about is Red Matter 2. That's the one title that added basically every feature of this thing working, and great title for showing off that things can be good on standalone if they want it to be. All right, let's get into the final conclusion of this device. Basically, I know I'm basically using this thing as a PC VR device, and that's just like a weird concept to maybe some people. But for me, I still do love PC VR. I still love doing VR chat and PC VR. It's so experimental. I just knocked off a cat ear. But it's everything I like about VR. I like these experimental early adopter things that just feel so weird and interesting. And this thing kind of is like that in a lot of ways. Like there's a lot of stuff there that are very early adopter and weird and can enable weirdness. But it only requires you, basically requires you to plug it into a PC if you want to get that full weirdness out of it. So I just can't help but imagine if this device was designed for PC VR in mind. This thing clearly has thermal limits. It has limits of what resolution it can render. It has limits to how bright the displays can get. The displays cannot run on an HDR mode. The battery life is abysmal with all the features on. It just thinks if a competitor that was focused on PC VR came out with a lot of these features, even an SoC, but at least had a full power connected to the wall, similar to like a Trident cable or something, I can only imagine how much better a device would be if it was focused on PC VR at this price. And I know that's like just one of those things where I'm just banging my head against a wall because It doesn't make sense to some people. They think PCVR is a dead gimmick. Well, this thing has a lot of gimmicks too. And I just think the gimmicks just don't match up with reality with the marketing, and that's one of my issues. This thing is being sold for $1,500, and the main reason it's being sold for that is not only because the cost that Meta has to pay to have each one built and sent out is around $750 for the whole BOM and all that money for the entire kit. They're selling it for $1,500 retail because they had to over-engineer it to make all these things work in standalone with all the limits I was discussing earlier. I returned this thing originally for $1,500. Like, I mean, you've heard me rant at the beginning of this video. Those rants feel even more painful to me. As someone who bought this device with my own money at $1,500, I could not, with any right mind, keep it with that price. It just had so many downsides for me. Even though it has some really cool features, it just wasn't enough for me to keep it. The only reason I have one in my hands, and this is probably the best example of what this device truly is worth. So I went on an aftermarket website and I found someone, actually a few people, that were selling Quest Pros basically open box, like brand new, used once. I actually contacted the seller and they told me they used it for 1 day. They got motion sick and then they put it back in the box and forgot to return it. So they had to sell it on aftermarket. And I was able to buy it for $1,100, which is basically a whole Quest 2 retail price cheaper. And for that price, yeah, I think this is worth that, especially with all the new updates that fix some of my bigger issues. But at $1,500, I really don't know who this is for. Like, I don't really see people who are standalone focused wanting to spend that much money, especially with Quest 3 coming out next year. It's going to have the same optics, some of the best features of the device with a brand new SoC, which will allow them to push even further than what this SoC provides. This headset is like how Quest 1 was to Quest 2. There is a Gen 2 of this device coming in 2024. They can take the optics, they can put better displays, hopefully micro OLED displays. Meta's been talking to a lot of companies about getting things ready for 2024, so it wouldn't shock me. Its current state, this feels like how Quest 1 will be abandoned pretty quickly, or how it was abandoned pretty quickly, and how a Quest 2 basically improved on a lot of the issues a Quest 1 had. Yeah, I just feel like the same thing is happening for this headset. It's a early adopter trap. That's all I can feel. Really, really good experience for environments in PC VR when you have everything at a high-end PC, but otherwise, I don't know who will be buying this to use it in standalone only mode. Anyway, that's pretty much everything. That was a long video, I'm sorry, but I take these videos very seriously for reviews. If you have any questions, you can lay them in the comments, but I also think I'll be doing a live AMA where we can talk about this and many other topics pretty much related to VR, because it's been a couple months since I did an AMA. I want to give a huge shout out, just again, a huge shout out to all my mega patrons you see here. I could not do any of these videos. I could not afford even $1,100 to spend on a headset without my my Patreon supporters and people like you who are watching these videos, and it's great. I don't take any sponsors to do these videos, so being able to be supported by the community that appreciate my opinions and my research and my content, it's super thankful. So that's it. We'll see you next time.